Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we're on this particular halacha. So Torah T'mimah, when it comes to the halachic parts of the Torah, he usually, is a lot more rigorous, but I just love his approach anyway. It's just interesting and original and creative, etc. Of course, brilliant. What can I say? So again, Va'ata, right? That verse, we did it yesterday. Have been looking at it of a few days, right? Vayomer Hashem Elohim Abraham. Elohim said to Abraham, Va'ata, right? There's that Va'ata, and as for you, it briti tishmor, you shall guard my covenant. Ata v'zaracha, you, so this repetition of ata, right? And your seed, acharecha, following you, ladorotam, for all generations, for their generations. So here we go. Amar v'ata, etc. Amar Rabbi Levi, said Rabbi Levi, Kativ, it states, Va'ata et briti tishmor. It says, and as for you, you shall guard my covenant. And here again, this, what we call a diuk, that's the term we use in Hebrew, meaning an emphasis that we place on a word. Ata, you, v'chol kiyotzebo, meaning, and you, and everyone like you, all who are like you. Mikan, from here, la'arel shelo yimol. So from here, we understand that since Abraham was circumcised, then only the person who is circumcised can perform the circumcision, right? La'arel shelo yimol, so that a non-circumcised person should not perform a circumcision. This is a statement that's found in the Yerushalmi Shabbat, in the tractate Shabbat, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, chapter 19, halacha 2. He's not going to have a lot to say about this because he's going to say, Hainu hachdav shakol. This is exactly the point of the previous drush, right? The previous interpretation. Uvi shinui lashon ktsat. But there's a little bit of a difference in language. The way it's being stated is a little bit different. V'yein ma shekatavti sham bevi'ur hadrasha. And look at what I wrote there in that previous drasha there. Okay? So, going on, Ata v'zaracha. Right, so you and your seed. Mipnei ma, for what reason? Lo nechshava mitzvat milah. So the question is being asked now, why is the commandment of milah, of circumcision, b'hadei sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach? Why isn't it included in the 7 commandments of b'nei Noach, right? In the 7 Noachide commandments. It's not one of those 7 listed. And the question is being asked, why not? After all, we're basically looking at the book of Genesis, and it's before the Jewish people became a people. That happened in Egypt right before the Exodus, where they are addressed as a nation. They became a nation in the land of Egypt, but here they're not. And so the question is being asked, why wasn't this included? And the answer is, Lafi de Mila Me'ikara Avraham, who to mizaher Rahmana. And it's the reason, Lafi, because that Me'ila, because the circumcision Me'ikra, in its essence, right, or from its very beginning, was Avraham, whom Abraham was warned to take heed, that Rahmana means the merciful one, meaning God. God warned Abraham. And also, of course, he doesn't. I think part of the idea here is that he didn't warn Noah. He didn't tell Noah about it. He told Abraham. And here we go, right? Va'ata, again, this, riffing on this va'ata et briti tishmor, and you, in other words, you, Abraham, and your descendants, et briti tishmor, you shall guard my covenant, ata v'zaracha acharecha ladorotam, right? So quoting from the verse, you and your seed after you for all generations. Ata v'zaracha, in meaning you and your seed, yes. Inash acharina lo, but other people no. And this is from Tractate Sanhedrin, page 50, looks like page 59b. So again, just really interesting that to what degree we are emphasizing the fact that the uniqueness of circumcision given to the Jewish people and the descendants of Abraham. And we know, of course, that the Muslims also, who consider themselves descendants of Abraham, also practice circumcision. And that's because we're going to see that Abraham actually practiced circumcision on Ishmael. So, going on. Now we have a little more to say here, not too much, but a little more. מה שאינו כן כל השבע מצוות מוזרים עליהם כל האומות, because that is not the case when it comes to the other 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, the 7 Noachide laws, muzarin alehem kol haumot. All the nations are warned regarding this, are told to heed this, take heed of it. Yenod, and see further, hashayach ledrashazo, that which applies to this particular interpretation, lekaman, meaning later on, we'll see it later on, but Parshat Vayera, in the Parsha Vayera, right, we're on Parsha Lech Lecha, and Vayera follows Lech Lecha, so the next Parsha, but Pasuk in the verse, Ki biyitzchak yikareh lecha zerach, for in Isaac your seed shall be known, something like that, shall be called. Okay, so on to that. Next. Okay. Here we are. So we're going on now to verse 10. Let's just go back to the Torah. Here we are. Zot briti, this is my covenant, asher tishmeru beini uvenechem, that you will guard between myself and you, uvein zaracha acharecha, and between your seed following you. And here it is, the mitzvah, himol lachem kol zachar. You shall circumcise every male among you, kol zachar. That little word kol is an important word. It means all. And when it comes to, we're going to see that when it comes to Jewish law, that word is very important and sometimes, or maybe has legal implications. So I like to give an example. So for example, if I say, I'd like your marbles, I want you to give me your marbles. So basically it means, the marbles that you have at hand. But if I say, I want you to give me all your marbles, it means you have to go looking under the bed, you have to go looking in your drawer, you have to go look in your chest, your toy chest. That little word all adds something to the commandment. So. Whereas if I just said, I want your marbles, you would not need to do that. So that's at least a way I think of explaining what the implication is. So, himolachon, himolachem, right? Mikan, from here, so you shall circumcise for yourselves. Mikan, and from this statement we learn, we can infer, dehechi delo mahalin avuha, that in a case of someone whose father did not see that he was circumcised, did not see to it that he was circumcised, machayve vetina lemimahale, the court is required, obligated, to make sure that he is circumcised if his father didn't take care of it. And this is in Kiddushin, the tractate Kiddushin, page 29a. And again, you are seeing examples of how we derive oral law from the Torah itself. That what is basically generating this whole exercise is the desire to make the Torah applicable and not just simply an ideal. And it's so tempting to, of course, to look at the values to the extent that one even cares, right, about these values and see them more as idealistic than as pragmatic. And this is the great metaphor of bringing the Torah down from Mount Sinai. And of course, when you have to apply these ideas, you have to look at all the various circumstances that take place when you're actually applying it. And here's an example, right? So we understand, we'll have to find that from somewhere else, that the father of the son, the father is obligated, the Jewish father, to make sure that his son is circumcised. But what happens if the father doesn't? Right? It happens. Sometimes it happens because he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't believe it. Sometimes it happens because there may not be a father, right? Father may have passed away. Things happen. So let's take a look at what we have to say here. Samach al halashon hi molachem. This law is based on the fact that it says, you shall make sure, right? You shall circumcise. Lachem, to you, right? Mishum, and why? Mishum de pashtuta inyon ba'atzmo, because the obvious understanding of how one would do this, right? Moreh, right? That it teaches us, it shows us, the pasuk zeh, that this particular verse, lo aire bechalut ha-mitzvah al hanimul ba'atzmo. The reason is that so often in almost all the other cases of mitzvah, when God commands you to perform the mitzvah, guess who has to perform the mitzvah? You. But in the case of a child, and he's going to tell you this, right? That in this case, it's clear that the mitzvah isn't given to the person who's going to get circumcised, right? That the even the way the mitzvah is being stated, right? He's going to say it. Kevan, since the mi'ikar ha-mitzvah, right? He beven shmonat yamim, because this very essence, right? This most important element of the mitzvah itself. Part of that mitzvah is that the child should be circumcised at 8 days old, right? And obviously, v'lo yitachen, and it's not possible. She'az yechal alav mamash sivoy. You can't say that you're giving this commandment to an 8-day-old baby, right? But it's a mitzvah. So who's got to do it? Not the baby. So here's a case where a mitzvah is being given regarding an individual. 99.9% of the time, if that mitzvah is given to an individual, the individual has to do it. But this is a case where it is not. Right? And because it says lachem, to you, this is from the verse, right? Darish, we explain, the ka'e al habetin, that the you, when the Torah refers to you in the plural, lachem is you plural, right? We are saying the court, that the lachem refers to a court. Uvadavar chiyuv ha'av, and with regards to the fact that the father is obligated to perform it, to make sure it's performed, yitpa'er, it'll become clarified, im yirtzeh Hashem, God willing, lefanenu, before us, the Parshat Vayera, in the Parsha of Vayera, the pasuk with the verse Vayimal Avraham et Yitzchak no, where it says Abraham circumcised Isaac, his son. Onwards. Some really cool stuff here. Okay. Let's find out here. Okay. Kol Zachar, every male. Kol, so there's this word kol, right, that I told you about. Lerabot, to include androgynous. And androgynous is a person who is bisexual. He has signs of both masculinity and femininity. And this is from Tractate Shabbat. This chapter in Shabbat deals with the issue of circumcision, specifically what happens when the 8th day falls on Shabbat. That becomes an issue now because we have a conflict of law, right? On the one hand, we have a positive commandment, but we also have a negative commandment of resting. Thou shalt do no work on the Sabbath day. And circumcision involves drawing blood. You're not supposed to do shechita on Shabbos. It would be considered a Shabbat prohibited labor. Page 138, A on Shabbat has this particular law. So it's saying that even it says kol zachar, every male, and that so we have to add to that law and say it even includes someone who has both sexes, both genders. Quite a bit to say about this. L'chiyuv milah bichlal, with regards to the commandment or the obligation to perform circumcision in general. L'chiyuv milah b'shmini, and the obligation to perform that circumcision on the 8th day. So that's what it means. That this particular statement is saying that if the child is an androgynous child, you have to perform the circumcision and you have to perform it on the 8th day. You have to do both things. However, nevertheless, ein milato doche et hashabbat. Nevertheless, in the case of an androgynous child, if the 8th day falls on Shabbat, you do not perform the circumcision, you delay it to the next day. Kefi sheyitba'er lekaman, as will be explained later on, the pasuk Yudalet, when we come to verse 14. V'tam hadavar. So why? What's the reason for this? Mishum de dechiyat Shabbat, right? Because the overriding of the Shabbat, noheget rak b'mi, it only applies with one sheyesh b'miniato, regarding the one who refuses to perform it, isur karet, right? That is to say that the fact that the circumcision overrides the Shabbat only applies to someone where the punishment for not performing circumcision is karet, is excision. Milah is one of those commandments, saying that if you do not perform milah, if a child does not have milah performed on it, it is karet. The punishment is excision. Whatever karet means, it's a divine punishment, right? There have been attempts to explain what it means. Does it mean premature death? That is one interpretation. Another interpretation is that it means you die without any children. In other words, your line comes to an end, etc. And that has only to do with one who's in a case where the milah was not performed, the punishment would be karet. And in that case, milah circumcision overrides Shabbat. However, aval, androgynous, since in case of an androgynous child, mikevan she'im lo mal, in a case if he does not get circumcised, eno chayav karet, he is not going to be punished with karet. And for this reason, circumcising an androgynous child does not override the Shabbat. The Tam Hadavar, again, there's lots of explaining to do, right? The Tam Hadavar, and the reason for this, she'ein bo karet, that karet does not apply to an androgynous child, near it would appear, mishum de la kaman, sorry about that, because later on, the Pasuk Yudayim, in verse 14, but onish karet, where it talks about this punishment of karet, lo ketiv kol zachar. It doesn't say kol zachar there. Rak zachar levad. It only says zachar. So we understand then that the punishment of karet only applies to males and not all males. And all males, we understand, includes androgynous children. V'arel zachar asher lo yimo basar ulato v'nichrata. He's quoting the verse now. He says it doesn't say v'arel kol zachar. It just says, and an uncircumcised male asher lo yimo, who is not circumcised, basar ulato, the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichrata, shall be cut off. Right? Will suffer the punishment of karet. Uva alma, right? And in general, hecha dichtiv zachar levad, that when the verse in the Torah, right, only mentions the word zachar, right, and doesn't say kol zachar, mema'atinan androgynous, we exclude an androgynous in that particular mitzvah. And he gives examples, kamo bepesach, regarding Pesach, dichtiv, because there it says zachar, right? It says male, mama'et androgynous. It is an androgynous child is excluded from that particular mitzvah. And I believe it has to do that. With Pesach also, there are issues of possibly karet, but even not, if it says the obligation of a male to eat the Paschal lamb. Possibly is what it's talking about when it talks about Pesach. Ube Parshat Mishpatim, and in the Parsha of Mishpatim, it says the V'yalda lo banim. This is a case of a woman who's given to an Israelite slave, right? And she has sons. Mema'atinan androgynous. We do not include the idea of androgynous. Now, exactly how that applies, I am wondering. It means that, remember, it says he goes out. I think what happens, if I'm not mistaken, is that the children belong to the owner, to the master. So here, this law would not apply. However, that has to work out. So there are details there that I am not aware of at this moment, but we're saying this is the general law that we're talking about there. Uva Parshat Mishpatim, and in the Parsha of Mishpatim, it says, sorry, we did that. Going on. V'shem ben. So there it says banim Rama. It doesn't say zachar, right? There's the point he's commenting here. And the word shem, which you probably know means name, but very often the word name, shem, refers to a noun, right? If you learned the definition of the word noun, I remember the definition way back in school, grammar school. It means a name given to a place, an animal, or a thing, right? So it is a name. So the noun. So the shem ben and the noun ben, hu kamo shem zachar. It is exactly the same as the noun zachar. V'chein b'nida. Another example in the tractate Nida, page 28b, hazachar. It says hazachar. Lahotzi tumtum androgynous. And there it says to exclude tumtum. A tumtum is someone whose genitals are sort of covered up by some layer of skin. Androgynous, you know what that means. For od kaina, and similar examples. For lachain, and for this reason, kan b'milah, regarding this mitzvah of circumcision, dichtiv ba'onish, right? Va'arel zachar, because regarding the punishment, it says arel zachar, an uncircumcised male. Motzi androgynous mikaret. The androgynous is excluded from the punishment of karet. However, that doesn't apply to the verse that we are looking at right now, which is talking about the obligation of circumcision in general. Pasuk Yud Bet Hasamuch, right? And regarding the verse on verse 12, right next to it, which talks about the necessity of milah lishmona, that it needs to be performed on the 8th day. Ketiv kol zachar, right? It says every male, marbinan androgynous, and for this reason we include the androgynous to say that he also has to be circumcised on the 8th day. Kamo ba'alma dechol ba larbot, as in general, that anytime you get the word ba, it comes to add to the mitzvah on some level. Right. So just to summarize a little bit, on the one hand, because it says kol zachar, not only with regard to the act of circumcision itself, the surgery, but regarding the day on which it's needed to be performed, we include an androgynous. However, if that 8th day falls on Shabbat, we do not include an androgynous. We have a conflict of law there, and because the overriding of Shabbat only applies to someone whose punishment is going to be karet, and we learned elsewhere that an androgynous, if he is not circumcised, is not punished by karet. For that reason, we do not override the Shabbat for an androgynous. A little bit complicated, but not impossible. And that's where we're going to end today's lesson. So I'm going to stop the share here and look forward to any comments you might have. Harlan? It looks like you're trying to unmute. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
On the 8th day falls on a Saturday.
Yes.
You cannot make circumcision then?
No, it's saying only, no. With a regular male, a child who is born fully male is
Yeah.
circumcised on the 8th day, assuming that everything else is okay, right?
And you can have circumcision on Saturday then.
You can override the Shabbat to do
Well,
that.
what's an indigenous child? What does that mean?
Androgynous.
Yeah, what's that mean?
It's a Greek word that means male, female. Andros is male, a man in Greek, and gynos in Greek means female. That's why a gynecologist, there's that Greek word there, means a doctor who specializes in women.
Harriet, here is your reminder.
Oh,
Appointment with Dr.
Alexa,
Gold at
stop.
2:15.
I've got to go. I've got another class.
No problem. Okay. All right.
so so the 8th day is actually, you can it falls on Shabbos, you can still have circumcision. Okay.
Yes, you do. You do. I mean, there may be other extenuating circumstances which require one to delay it, but performing the circumcision on the 8th day is an essential part of the mitzvah.
Okay. Even if it's delayed, you still have to have circumcision to be a Jewish
Yes.
person.
Yes. Well, to be a Ben Brit, yes.
Yeah, a member of the
to be a
tribe. Yeah.
child of the covenant, yes. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Very good.
One thing else.
Let me stop the recording, okay?
Okay. Yeah.